Getting a stage 4 colorectal cancer diagnosis is tough, especially when you receive this diagnosis at the young age of 28. When treatment options aren't working or your oncologist isn't listening to your concerns, you have to be brave enough to gather up the courage to literally advocate for your life. This is exactly what my friend Steven has had to do, and because he did, he is alive today and he's here to share his story with you all. He's going to talk to us about his symptoms, what happens when the first line of treatment isn't working, how one of his surgeries nearly killed him, and what it's like to be on an immunotherapy trial. His story is my final interview in this 4-part series for Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, where I'm talking with survivors of this crappy disease that have been diagnosed from stage 1 all the way through stage 4. Really quick, before I start my interview with Steven, let me introduce myself to anyone that's new out there. My name is Jelena, and I was diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer at age 34. This channel is here to talk all about colorectal cancer, what treatment is like, and how life just doesn't return back to normal once treatment ends. If you like what you're hearing so far, click on the subscribe button below over here so that you'll never miss any of my latest videos. Now let's chat with Steven. All right, well, welcome, Steven. Before we get too much into your interview, can you tell us a little bit about your pre-cancer self?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Steven Estrada, and prior to cancer, I was 27. I remember being a hairstylist. I was a fledgling hairstylist. I was getting my life on track. I remember thinking it was really that part of my life that I was getting everything together. Early 20s were a little rocky, a little too much fun at times. College was great. But right around 26, 27, 28, I felt like everything was sinking together and my relationship was really starting to blossom, and we were looking at houses to buy. I mean, it was good. Things can change so quickly, can't they?
Right, right. So, can you talk to us about the symptoms that you were experiencing before your diagnosis, and how long was it from when you started experiencing those until you actually got your diagnosis?
Sure. At face value, I would say I started getting symptoms right before my diagnosis, like maybe a couple weeks. But when I started talking to my family and my husband's family, we realized that really I'd been complaining about stomach pains for probably the better part of a year. But it was really dull pains, or it was, bathroom issues. Either I couldn't stop going, or I couldn't go. Uh, I wouldn't be able to eat as much. It was just little complaints here and there, peppered throughout the year. Um, I remember one instance. It must have been, gosh, I don't know. It was the year before I was diagnosed, and I was diagnosed in like June of 2014. Um, so actually, the spring of 2014, we were at my sister-in-law's graduation, and I remember sitting there watching her graduate, and I wanted to die. I was in so much pain, and that was the moment that things started really kind of compounding. From then on, it was daily struggles. It was pain constantly. It was walking around the house at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to walk off the pain. Um, we were on vacation right before my diagnosis in Jamaica, which was, fabulous. And the last couple of days were just so miserable for me because I couldn't leave the hotel room. I literally sat in the hotel room while everyone did, the waterfalls and the hikes and everything. They had all this fun, and I was in the hotel room, doubled over in pain, bleeding. Um, that was that was kind of the moment I knew. So Jamaica, I don't think I'll be going back there for that reasons.
I can understand. It's got some bad juju to it.
Bad juju, right, right.
So, how did you end up being diagnosed?
So on the way back from Jamaica, I bought Wi-Fi for like the first time in my life. That's how serious it was. I bought Wi-Fi on the plane because I started looking up doctors. I was like, as soon as I land, I have to get to a doctor. Unfortunately, I think it was like a Sunday evening. Nothing was happening. I couldn't get a hold of anyone. So the next day I went to the ER. And you have probably heard this story many times over. I was pretty much told nothing was wrong with me. I was given laxatives. I was told I was constipated. Um, a little background. My grandmother had colorectal cancer at 35. So I took that information with me to the ER and said, "Hey, I have a family history. I don't know what cancer feels like, but I think that this is it." And I remember saying those exact words, and they were like, "No, you're too young for cancer. You'll be fine." So I left with the laxatives, and I went back to the ER 2 other times. By the third time, they were treating me like a drug addict because I was demanding pain pills. I remember specifically they were asking me about my symptoms, and they started kind of asking me questions I hadn't answered before about pain management and how many pills I was taking a day. And up to then, none. They wouldn't give me any. So it was just really, I was baffled that they were treating me like that. And so I finally found a primary care. Um, she was actually an NP, and she had room to take me. I had no idea who she was. Sat in her office, told her what was going on. She believed me. She set a CT scan for the following week. And then as we were leaving, I had lymph nodes in my back. And I'll never forget this. They blew up as they had before to like, I mean, I swear they were like that big. I always say like the size of peaches. And so I stopped in the hallway and I said, "You have to feel my back. It's happening." So she feels up and down my back. And, I see her face completely change. And she canceled the CT scan for the following week and made it for the following day. And said, "We have to figure out what's going on right now." And that was kind of, the beginning of the beginning.
Okay. So then what was your official diagnosis?
Inoperable, metastatic, stage 4 colorectal cancer. It was, they when they called me back for my CT scan results, they said, "You have to come in." At this point, I convinced myself and my partner that it was IBS, or I had celiac disease, gluten intolerant. All these stories you make up in your head about what it is.
Mhm.
When the day before, I was convinced it was cancer, so I was doing the acrobatics for sure. Um, I told him, "You go to work, and I'll go to the doctor. I'll be back. It'll be fine." They're just going to tell me some news I already know. Bye. And I get there, and I get to the doctor's office, and the NP walks in, and right behind her, the head of the practice walks in. And that was one of those moments I was like, "I don't know this guy, but he looks important." And I shook his hand, and he introduced himself and said, "I'm here because I'm going to answer any questions you may have, and you're going to have a lot. We're dealing with something very serious here." Uh, and he put the scan down, and never seeing a scan in my life, I saw a slice of my body, and right in the center, it was just like this black. And I knew that wasn't supposed to be there. So, uh, you know, emergency surgery happened, more PET scan, and that was confirmed that it had spread actually to my mesentery. For those of you who don't know, a little bit of trivia: the mesentery is a fatty tissue that it kind of goes all up and down your stomach, and it holds your organs and your vital blood supplies to your back, so nothing's jiggling around. Uh, Unfortunately, it can't really be cut into a whole lot because it holds so many structures. And so my tumor had broke through the colon wall, leaked all over my mesentery, and was kind of like a spider web, just kind of connecting everything at that point.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yes, I did not know what the mesentery was before either.
The
So
more you know.
thank you for educating me on that. And I haven't heard of other people that have had it spread there. I mean, maybe it has, and I haven't just haven't heard that before.
Yeah, I think often when it does, it's just described as peritoneal disease, because it's that same kind of area. But I do think that there's a distinct difference. I believe it's actually kind of rare. So, just kind of, getting young cancer and getting rare metastases. I'm doing it all right.
Yeah, it just goes along with your entire story. There's
Why
a
not?
rare unicorn out there.
Right.
So, what was your initial treatment plan?
So, I said emergency surgery. They cut out a part of my colon, then said everything else was inoperable. Doctor put a note on my door: "Don't discuss his prognosis with them," which, as you know, was grim. So word got out, and I knew my diagnosis. Um, 3 weeks after healing from the surgery, I went to an oncologist, and I started Folfox very, very quickly. Folfox was just as miserable as I could have imagined. I didn't know what chemo, I only knew what the movies showed me, and I would say it was like that, but worse, because I was, in that movie. So after 12 rounds of that, you know what? That's my initial one. That's my initial plan. So I did FOLFOX, and the plan was to get to a surgery. And everything kind of dominoed after FOLFOX.
All right. So the plan was just to do those 12 rounds of FOLFOX and kind of see if the cancer had responded and go from there and then come up with the next plan.
Yeah. So my oncologist was really just a few years older than me. And so right away I was like, oh, girl, I might need you to be a little older, a little more experienced. This is kind of serious. She was treating me like, I was 85 and I was already dead. So I tried to look a little more outside of the box. And I convinced her to early on to think the same way. And so we agreed on FOLFOX. We said, hey, let's see how the tumor responds. And if it shrinks enough, we're going to try something new called, not new, but new for colorectal cancer, NanoKnife. And NanoKnife had been used in pancreatic cancer to hit tumors that were very, lodged in very sensitive areas. So real quick, all it is they stick metal rods into your tumor and they electrocute you and kind of roll you back and forth for like hours. And so that was me. During this whole time, I found out that I was Lynch positive. And again, for maybe someone who's watching and doesn't know, Lynch syndrome is a genetic syndrome that I have and my family carries that predispositions me to colorectal cancer and several other cancers. So my risk of getting them throughout my lifetime is elevated, much like the BRCA gene, for breast cancer. So, I had mentioned my grandmother had it at 35. After my diagnosis, my mother was confirmed Lynch, and she actually had stage 2 colorectal cancer growing asymptomatically, and it was almost stage 3. So, she had no idea. All that to say, really, roundabout way of saying I got to the NanoKnife surgery, and that was for being experimental surgery on me. It was terrible. It nearly killed me. The recovery, anyways. So after the surgery, they said, you're probably NED. You're probably going to stay that way for 2 years, and we'll probably come up with a better plan during those 2 years. And I said, fine, I'll take it. I was not NED. In fact, the tumor seemed to have grown exponentially in the healing time. And I ended up hemorrhaging during my recovery phase. And Kenley, had to call the ambulance, and there's a blizzard, and I was taken away in the ambulance, bleeding. I'd been bleeding all day, out of everywhere, basically. And I spent about 2 weeks in the ICU. I lost so much blood that I started having seizures. It was one of the moments where I thought, I need to call my family and say goodbye. And no one could come see me because it was blizzarding so bad. It was terrible. So yeah, didn't die though. So, positive spin.
So then how did you get from that point to going onto an immunotherapy trial?
So after NanoKnife and after the recovery, I knew that I could not go back on FOLFOX. It was so hard on me, and I hear some people get through it and they're relatively okay, and I'm so jealous because mine was terrible. So I fired my oncologist because she didn't want to talk about clinical trials anymore. After the NanoKnife thing, I'd already made the decision. After NanoKnife, she can get me to that. I'm out. I need someone else. So I found a support group with the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, and it's Blue Hope Nation on Facebook, and met a lot of people in Denver where I live, who also were patients. And they said, Stephen, if you want to live, you need to go see this guy. And so they gave me a doctor's name, Dr. Messersmith, at the University of Colorado Hospital, and I met with him. And this is while we thought I was NED, from the NanoKnife. So I met with him during this period, and he said, it will come back. We're going to have a plan. Don't worry. I'm already on it. I already have all your genetics. He had information. He had a plan. He had all this stuff that the other oncologists didn't have. And so it was really refreshing. I went home, and about a week later, I woke up from a nap, and I was just in extreme pain. And it was a very, very familiar pain. And I knew that pain. I knew it was the tumors. And so I got up and told Kenley, we need to go to the hospital now. I need a scan. I'm not leaving till I get one. By this point, I had become pretty good at advocating for myself. So we went and did that. And I got the scan, and sure enough, the tumors were larger. And sure enough, just like he promised, my oncologist had a plan, and he said, you have Lynch syndrome. That makes your cancer a little bit different than non-Lynch syndrome. So let's put you on an immunotherapy trial because we're seeing really good responses to, immunotherapy with Lynch syndrome, not with patients who don't have Lynch syndrome. This was a lot for me to take in, of course. It was a drug that didn't have a name yet. It was MPDL 3280A. So it's just jumble of letters and numbers, but I remember it. And so I took a couple days to think about signing up for the immunotherapy trial. And I remember it was about 3:00 in the morning and I was just wrecked. And I emailed him and I said, I can't make a decision. I'm so scared, but I don't want to go out like, this. What would you do if you were me? And he says, I'll do you one better. If you were my son, you would have already been on this trial months ago. And I said, okay. So I signed the papers that night, sent them in. The fact that he got back to me at 3:00 in the morning still kind of blows my mind. But I started screening for the trial process, and that's like the Olympics, really.
So can you talk about the actual enrollment process for the trial?
Yeah. So my doctor has his own lab, so he had his own he's very aware of clinical trials, which was awesome. Many people don't have that. So one of my pieces of advice to patients, it's learn about the clinical trial process early and have someone on your team who knows it. If it's not your oncologist, maybe there's a research assistant somewhere that you can talk to, but someone has to help you navigate the clinical trial world. It's impossible otherwise. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. It's so long ago. He said there's going to be a lot of tests, and I didn't know what a lot of tests meant, but there were a lot of tests. It was everything from like echocardiograms to blood draws like every other day, a complete physical. It was a bone scan. It was a vascular scan. It was a brain scan even. I couldn't have brain mets. And so it was all these new tests that were just very, very frightening because every test is one more likelihood or one more percentage point that you're not going to be accepted onto this trial. Fortunately, I cleared everything and I started the trial shortly after that. You really do. You sign everything away. There's a lot of paperwork. It's a little intimidating, but your team will explain it to you. They will make sure you understand everything and you aren't signing anything you aren't comfortable with. They are there to hold your hand. And when you're on a trial, they really take the best care of you because they want to know what's going on. There was never a moment where I felt like I was being ignored or just not looked after. So it was that brought me comfort.
Okay. So that kind of leads into the next question, like, what is it like being on a trial? It sounds like they take really good care of you. Are there like things that you have to fill out? Do you have to go in for like monitoring more often than if you were just traditionally going through chemotherapy? How is that?
Yes to all of that. So when I first started, you go in and you get the drug, and so I don't know about all trials, but for my trial, the drug was spread out over like 3.5 hours, and it was a very slow drip. And then I had to sit there for hours and get monitored. And then, the next round was a little bit shorter. So they were decreasing the amount of time it took to get the drug and the amount of time that I had to stay being monitored until we got to the point of the drug being infused over 30 minutes. And then I left, which was awesome, because even Folfox took all day. So the monitoring was pretty intense at first. And that seems a little daunting, especially for people who are already experiencing barriers to clinical trials. One of the big barriers is having to be there. If you're in a rural area and you have to be at your center that's in the big city every other day, like I had to be, that's difficult. So, you have to work through some of these issues. But it gets easier. The longer you're on a trial and the more success you have, the more leeway, I guess, you get, and the more time in between things. So by the end of the trial, and there was an end to the trial, I was only going in once every 3 weeks for infusion to see my doctor, got everything done in one day, and that was it. So, I would say my experience was probably far different than most clinical trial experiences. So, I always try to say that to an audience. This is not always typical results. And we can get to those results whenever, I'm sure in a minute, stay tuned. But it's, you really have to take into consideration yourself and your family and your lifestyle when considering a clinical trial. It can be so worth it.
Hmm. So what phase was the trial in when you started it? Was it, there's three different phases, correct? One is like the very earliest, and three is when it's basically like ready to go out to the public.
Yes, I was phase one. So the way that was explained to me was, we're not trying to cure you. We're just trying to see if we kill you. And I'm like, oh, well, great, awesome, sign me up. But what actually helped was, the reason it was a phase one trial was because the sponsor, Genentech, had already gone through a phase three trial with a drug alone. This was a phase one trial combining it with an already approved drug, Avastin. So I felt pretty good that they had already established safety, and they were combining it with a drug that's been around forever. So yeah, phase one. It's a little like, you know, it can be a little daunting, but you got to start somewhere. Science doesn't just happen. So
Right, right. And there's probably a lot of people that are alive today because you volunteered to do this trial and figure out how it works and all of that.
God, I hope so. Yeah, yeah.
So then how long did it take for you to become NED from going through the trial?
About a year and a half. So the trial, when it started, my first infusion, I was overcome with just this pain I've never experienced before. During the infusion, it caused like the tumors to flare up, and I knew right there that something was happening. This was different. From then on, the pain I actually looked forward to. It's a little weird because it would lessen every time I got the drug, and I was like, well, if it's lessening, um, that must mean something's getting better. And sure enough, that's what happened. My tumor started shrinking almost immediately, by millimeters, just, tiny increments. And it stayed that way up until about a year and a half later. It was a scan in February of 2016, I believe. I started in 2015. Um, yeah, it was right around Valentine's Day. I was cutting someone's hair because I was back to work. The drug got me so healthy so quick that I got to go back to work. Which was pretty incredible. And I was cutting someone's hair and my phone rings, and it was my nurse. And I said, hold on, new person, I don't know you, but I have to take this call. And I took it right in front of her. She ended up being a nurse, which was pretty cool, an oncology nurse, which was even better. But the nurse who called me was crying, and I was like, oh no, this is not good. And she said, Stephen, we're looking over your scans and no one can believe it. There's no evidence of cancer in your body anywhere. And prior to that, we've been shrinking them millimeter by millimeter, and all of a sudden they just disappeared. They were gone. And since then, I've been NED. And so that was 2017. It's now 2021. It's a little like mind blowing to think of it that way, but it's been a good time.
Yeah. So then how long after that did you continue with the immunotherapy?
So protocols now, I think, recommend 2 years if you respond. So you go about 2 years, and they take you off the drug. And if you responded really well, they're finding that you generally continue to respond. Your body kind of works up a memory, kind of like a vaccine-ish. But when I started the trial, they didn't have the 2-year protocol. So I stayed on the trial about 5 years. And I had a lot of immunotherapy pumped into this little frame. So I think I stayed on probably. I think I was one of the longest, if not the longest. I don't have any data for that, but that's what I'm saying. I was the longest, but it was about 5 years. I was officially graduated out November of 2019. It's right before the pandemic started. I was in the hospital for a burst artery because I just can't stop trying to die. But that was during COVID. So yeah, it was right around then. So it's been over a year that I've been off of treatment completely, which has been awesome. I feel great. I don't have any real fear of recurrence right now. Lynch patients seem to do so well with immunotherapy that if the cancer comes back, they can usually get back on the drug and see the same results. So I'm very, very fortunate to, the researcher. I'm so grateful to the researchers and the medical professionals and people who day in and day out do work to save people like me. And if it can happen to me, you know, it can happen to anyone.
Yeah. So that's really promising too, that it shows that if the cancer does happen to come back, you'll still respond. And it's not like with traditional chemotherapies where sometimes your body kind of gets used to it and it doesn't start working anymore. So
Yeah.
that's probably even more reassuring because you've seen like the miracle that it can do already.
I've seen it not just in myself, but in many other patients. So I became a part of the Colorectal Cancer Alliance a couple of years, about 3 years ago. I had started off in their online community, just being, someone who was being supported by them and their programs, to now working with them. And through that whole process, I've met so many wonderful, wonderful friends, many of which aren't here any longer, but there are many who are, and many who are the faces of science and medical progress. I see terrible things every day, but I see things that give me so much hope even more. So, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is your current follow-up or monitoring schedule?
So I have a scan coming up in, I think, 3 more months. So right now we're doing every 6 months when I was doing like every 8 weeks. So that's a big change. Uh, I go for a blood draw when I do the scan, and they'll check that. And then since I've been graduated, they don't really want to see me. They kind of booted me out the door. So I'll probably see them once a year. Because of Lynch syndrome, I will do my yearly screening. So I have a yearly colonoscopy, which I'm due for. I have a dermatology appointment that I have to get the whole body looked over. Um, just kind of Lynch syndrome stuff. Lynchies out there know what I'm talking about, but you got to be vigilant. Knowledge is power. Screening saves lives.
Yeah, definitely. So that is the end of my questions. Was there anything that you thought of while we were talking that you want to talk about or mention?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. If I had to give advice to any patient, uh, it would be, and this goes contrary to what most doctors say, I think. They say, don't go to Google. Don't Google your disease. Don't do it. Don't ask questions. You're just going to get scared. I say the opposite. I say, Google it. You have to know your enemy. You have to know what you're up against. If I didn't know that Lynch syndrome was a thing, or that it responded slightly different to immunotherapy, I would not have known to tell my first oncologist about that, or she didn't know that. This was at a time when people really didn't know yet, So by learning what was going on inside of me, it really furthered the conversations that I was able to have with my oncology team. I was able to ask educated, thoughtful questions. I was able to question things they were doing. And I really helped guide my treatment path. And I find, just, anecdotally, uh, the people who take the steering wheel in their treatment plan seem to do better. They seem to handle treatments better. They seem to handle side effects better. They may live longer. That's what I observe. So yeah, so be your own best advocate. If you're not willing to save your life, why should anyone else try? So I don't know if that sounds harsh. I hope it doesn't, but you know what I mean. You got to be very, very invested. But I think that's what I would say to anyone. Find yourself a support group. Love your caregivers. Caregivers, thank you for everything you do. You are just as big of a part of our stories as anything else. So shout out to all the caregivers. We couldn't do it without you. Take care of yourself, and forgive us when we're jerks, I guess.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing your inspiring story. I hope that he has inspired you to take charge of your health and not be afraid to get a second opinion if things aren't going well with your current doctor. Click on the like button over here to wish him the best of health. To keep up with what life is like as a cancer survivor, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or my newly created Facebook page, Life as a Cancer Survivor. You can find me on Instagram at colorado.jelena, or over on Twitter, you can find me at survivor_Jelena. The links to all of those will be in the description below that you can click on, so then you don't have to worry about remembering how to spell Jelena. If you missed the first part of this series, click on the playlist right up here, and that'll be my interviews with the stage 1 through stage 3 survivors that I've done this month. Or you can click on the video down here. That's one YouTube thinks you'd really enjoy from my channel. Thank you for watching.